Right, so this one is a bit of an odd one, and I mean that in the best possible way. Of all the strange corners of Middle-earth, the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that genuinely rattles around my head at silly hours of the night, is a single sentence. Just one line, said almost in passing by a tired old wizard who has just come back from the dead. He doesn't dwell on it, he mentions it, sort of shudders, and moves on. And I have never quite been able to move on with him. Because in that one line, Tolkien casually tells us that far beneath everything we think we know about this world, below the mines, below the dwarves, below even the monsters we're supposed to be afraid of, there are older things, nameless things, and he never, ever explains them. So that's where we're going tonight. Down, slowly, into the deep, dark places, under the mountains, into the drowned pools and the tunnels nobody dug, and into all the odd, ancient, unexplained corners of this world that Tolkien left deliberately unlit. I'll be honest with you, a lot of what we're going to talk about is mystery rather than fact. There are no tidy answers here. But that's sort of the point, and it's a big part of why I love it. We'll wander through the lore, poke at the theories, I'll share a few of my own daft opinions along the way, and mostly we'll just sit with how enormous and strange this world actually is once you start looking past the main story. There's no rush at all. You don't need to follow a plot or remember any names. If you drift off halfway through a sentence about a spider older than the sun, that's a good sign, honestly. That's the whole idea. If you enjoy this sort of slow lore wander and you're not already subscribed, feel free to sort that out before you settle in. And then settle in properly. Get comfortable. We're going somewhere very deep and very old, and we're going to take our sweet time getting there. Let's start with that one line. So, Fangorn Forest. Gandalf has just rejoined the story, after everyone, including the reader, was fairly sure he was gone for good. He falls with the Balrog down in Moria, and for a good long while, that is that. Then he turns back up, older and stranger and dressed all in white, and he sits down, with Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, to explain roughly what happened to him down there in the dark. Now you'd think the headline of that story would be the fight, the falling, the dying, and it sort of is, but tucked into the middle of it, almost as an aside, Gandalf says something that has quietly haunted Tolkien readers ever since. He tells them that far below the deepest tunnels the dwarves ever managed to dig, the world is gnawed at by nameless things. He says even Sauron does not know about them, and he says they are older than Sauron. Then he basically goes, I have walked down there, but I am not going to describe it to you because I don't want to darken the daylight. And he moves on. That's it. That's the whole thing. Here's what gets me. This is the only time in the entire work these creatures are ever mentioned. Not a chapter. Not a footnote. One breath from one character, and then Tolkien shuts the door and never opens it again. And the more you sit with that line, the weirder it gets. Especially the older than Sauron part. Because if you know your Tolkien cosmology, that should not really be possible. Let me explain gently, because this is the one place I am going to properly get into it. And then I'll leave it alone. Sauron isn't from Middle-earth originally. He's one of the Ainur, these sort of angelic spirits who existed before the world did. Before. As in, they were around when the world was still just an idea, a piece of music being sung, which we will absolutely come back to later because it's gorgeous. The point is, Sauron is older than the stars, older than the ground, older than time as we would measure it. He predates more or less everything. So when Gandalf says something is older than Sauron, he is saying something a bit mad. He's pointing at creatures gnawing away at the roots of the world and telling us they were somehow there first, before one of the oldest beings in all of creation. And nobody can explain how. Not really, not even Gandalf. And this is the part that always gets me, because Gandalf spent an entire age of the world living alongside these ancient spirits in the Undying Lands. He grew up in their company, so to speak. He of all people should know what everything is. And he takes one look at whatever is down in those tunnels and comes back with no name for it. There are theories, good ones, We'll turn them over slowly across the next while. But I didn't want to rush past just how strange the setup is, because honestly, the setup is most of the appeal. A wizard who knows almost everything, describing the one thing he ever met that he couldn't put a name to, and then choosing not to tell us what it looked like. Tolkien could have written pages on them. He wrote pages on nearly everything else. He mapped out entire languages, family trees going back thousands of years, more or less the customs of the Shire. And then here, at the very bottom of his world, he just stops. Draws a curtain. Nameless. I think that's a brilliant instinct, and we'll come back to why near the end. For now, just let it sit. Somewhere under the mountains, older than the Dark Lord, there is something even the wise won't describe. Right, let's back up a little, because it turns out this wasn't even the first hint we got. Here's a lovely little detail that I completely missed the first time round, and only clocked years later. That line in Fangorn, the Nameless Things one, it isn't actually the first time Tolkien nudges us about all this. He had already done it, much earlier, much more quietly, back at the gates of Moria in the first book, and once you notice it, the whole thing starts to feel beautifully deliberate. Picture the scene. The Fellowship is standing outside the west gate of Moria by that horrible still pool, and something has just tried to grab them. In the aftermath, Gandalf mutters, almost to himself, that there are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. Older and fouler than orcs. At the time you read it as a throwaway bit of atmosphere, a wizard being ominous, which he's very good at. But looking back, it's the exact same idea. He's telling us right there at the doorway that the orcs are not the bottom. The orcs are near the top, if anything. There is a whole descending ladder of worse and older things underneath, and the orcs are just the ones who happen to be in your way. So you've got two moments, in two different books, bracketing the entire Moria sequence. One as they go in, one as Gandalf comes back out the far side of death, before and after. And both times he points down and says, there is worse below. I really like that as a piece of craft. It's the kind of thing that makes the world feel like it has a basement, and then a sub-basement, and then something under that you would really rather not think about. And actually, if you go back even further, all the way to The Hobbit, there is an even earlier whisper of the same thing. When Bilbo is lost in the goblin tunnels, Tolkien mentions, sort of in passing, that there are strange things living in the pools and lakes in the hearts of the mountains, things older than the goblins that were there before them. He describes them as more slimy than fish, which is a phrase that has lived in my head, rent-free for a very long time. More slimy than fish. Cheers for that, Professor. The goblins, when they dug their tunnels, didn't dig into empty rock. They dug into caves that already had owners, and those owners didn't leave. They just withdrew, went deeper, kept to the odd corners out of sight, while the goblins bustled about up above, thinking the whole place was theirs. That image genuinely unsettles me more than any big dramatic monster. The idea that all through The Hobbit, all through that jolly little adventure with the riddles and the ring, there were things sat in the dark just below, older than everything, quietly minding their own business. Nobody bothered them. They bothered nobody, but they were there the whole time. So by the time Gandalf drops the famous line in the third book, Tolkien has actually been laying this in for years, across 3 different points in the story, getting quieter and older each time. The Hobbit hints at slimy things in mountain pools. Fellowship warns of older, fouler things than orcs. And then, right at the bottom, the Nameless Things, older than the Dark Lord himself. It's like a staircase going down into the dark, and each step is a bit colder than the last. And Tolkien only ever lets us see the top few steps. The rest just keep going. I find something oddly peaceful about that, weirdly. The sense that the world doesn't revolve around the story, that there are whole populations of ancient things down there who never once care about the ring, or Sauron, or any of it. They were there long before, and as far as we know, they are there long after. Anyway, let's actually go and look at the one deep-dwelling creature we do get to see, because there are at least two, and it is a proper nightmare. Alright, the Watcher. If you only know one creepy thing from the gates of Moria, it's probably this one, and for good reason. It's the closest we ever get to actually seeing something out of the deep dark places, and Tolkien writes it so well that it has stuck with people for 70 odd years now. Let me set the picture properly, nice and slow. The Fellowship comes down out of the mountains, cold and tired and already having a rotten time of it, and they arrive at a lake, a dark, still stagnant lake right up against the western wall of Moria. Nobody likes it. The water is the wrong kind of quiet. Sam dips his foot near the edge at one point and just recoils, disgusted, at the touch of it. And honestly, that little detail does more work than any amount of dramatic music. It's the water itself that feels wrong before anything even happens. They're standing on a narrow strip of shore, trying to work out the riddle of the doors, and there's this soft sound every now and then, a swish, a plop, like a fish breaking the surface, except you get the sense it isn't a fish. Ripples spreading out across the black water, for no reason you can see, and then it happens. Out of the lake comes an arm. Tolkien describes it as pale green and luminous and wet, which is such a precise and horrible little run of words. A long sinuous tentacle, glowing faintly, with a sort of many-jointed finger-like tip to it, like a hand on the end of it, and that hand grabs Frodo by the foot and starts dragging him, calmly, towards the water. Sam, bless him, is the one who reacts. He's down on his knees hacking at the thing with a knife, until it lets go, and the moment it does, the whole lake sort of erupts. Many more arms come rippling out of the water. The surface starts to boil, and there's this appalling stench that comes up with it. The Fellowship bolts through the doors into Moria, and as they go, the creature slams the doors shut behind them with those same arms and seals them in for good. And here's the thing. We never see the rest of it. Not the body, not the head, not the eyes if it even has eyes. Just the arms. Just those pale, glowing, grasping arms coming out of the black. 21 of them, if you count. Which of course people have. That is all Tolkien gives us, and it's a masterclass really, in showing you just enough. Your imagination fills in whatever's attached to those arms, and whatever you come up with is going to be worse than anything he could have written down. I've seen a fair few attempts by artists over the years to draw the whole beast, and some of them are wonderful, but none of them ever land quite as hard as the bit where you simply don't know. Frodo, very reasonably, asks Gandalf what on earth that was, and Gandalf, who as we've established tends to know things, gives him a properly unsettling non-answer. He doesn't know either. He says only that something crept out, or was driven out, from the dark water under the mountains. And then he adds that same warning we already touched on, about the older, fouler things down in the deep. So even Gandalf, standing right there, having just watched the thing try to eat a hobbit, cannot tell you what it was. He can only tell you which direction it came from. Down. Out of the deep. We'll get into the theories about what it might have been, because there are some good ones, and I've got opinions, obviously. But before all that, I think it's worth talking about the lake itself, because the lake has a backstory, and it's the kind of quiet, slow geological backstory that I find genuinely lovely to sit with. How did a dark, monster-filled pool end up parked right outside the front door of the greatest dwarf city ever built? Turns out it wasn't always there at all, so this is one of those bits of Tolkien that I think is easy to skate right past, but if you slow down on it, it's really rather beautiful in a melancholy sort of way. That lake outside Moria hasn't always been a lake. Once upon a time, there was a river there. A clear, ordinary, well-behaved river called the Cyrenon, running past the west gate and away down the valley. And there was a road too, an old elven road, that ran alongside it, connecting the dwarf city of Moria to the elven city of Ostin Edhill away to the west. In the good years, back in the Second Age, that whole area would have been busy. Traffic between elves and dwarves, goods and messengers going back and forth, the river running along beside the road, all very pleasant and civilized. And then, at some point nobody can quite date, the river got dammed. The water stopped flowing away like it should, and instead it started to pool. And it kept pooling. Slowly, over a very long time, that clear stream backed up and spread out and filled the whole valley floor until the road was underwater, and the only way to reach the gate was a thin ledge of shore squeezed between the cliff and the black water. Nobody knows for certain what dammed it, and that little gap in the record has led to my favourite theory about the whole thing, which is that the Watcher did it itself, that the creature came up from somewhere deep, blocked the river on purpose and built itself a nice dark home right there against the wall, like some horrible landlord. I've got no proof of that, mind, nobody does. But there is something wonderfully grim about the idea that the lake isn't a natural accident at all, that the monster made the pond. Either way, the timescale of it is the part I love. This wasn't a sudden thing. A river doesn't become a lake overnight. This happened across centuries quietly, while the world got on with its business. The elven city fell. The dwarves eventually abandoned Moria, and all the while the water just kept creeping up the valley, inch by inch, covering the old road, drowning that whole busy stretch of the world under still black water. There's a comparison I keep reaching for here, and it's just real life, honestly. It's the way actual landscapes change so slowly you'd never notice inside a single lifetime. Coastlines shifting, valleys flooding when a river gets blocked, whole villages that are underwater now, sitting at the bottom of reservoirs with the church steeple still down there in the dark. You get droughts sometimes where the water drops and the old drowned village turns up again for a few weeks, all grey and silted, and then it's gone under once more. That's the energy of the Moria Lake for me. A drowned world, with a road still down there, somewhere under the weed going nowhere. And of course, sitting in all that dark water is the thing with the arms. There's a nice grim symmetry to it. The road used to carry people between two of the great civilizations of the age. Now it's a moat guarded by something nobody can name. The bright thing became the dark thing very gradually, and no one was really watching when it happened. Tolkien doesn't spell any of this out as some big tragic moment, by the way. It's mostly bits and pieces you assemble yourself from the text and the maps and the notes, but that's part of why it works on me. You have to sit with it a while for the sadness of it to land. A river that used to flow, dammed and gone still. A road that used to be walked, gone under. And the whole time, this patient, ancient thing waiting in the deep end, in no hurry at all. Right, let's talk about whether that patient thing in the deep end is actually one of our nameless things, or just its own separate horror. Because the readers have thoughts, I have thoughts, and it's a proper good debate. So here's the big question, and it's the one that gets Tolkien folk properly going round in circles. Was the Watcher in the water actually one of the nameless things Gandalf talks about later? Or was it just its own separate, unrelated nightmare that happened to live nearby? I'll lay out the case because honestly, I go back and forth on it depending on my mood. The argument for them being connected starts with Gandalf's own words. When Frodo asks what the thing was, Gandalf says it crept, or was driven, out of the dark water under the mountains. And then immediately, in the same breath, he says, there are worse and older things than orcs down in the deep places. He puts those two ideas right next to each other. The tentacled thing and the older and fouler things. It's very easy to read that as Gandalf gesturing at the same category. Like he's half saying, that was one of them, one of the deep old things. Come up to the surface for a bit. Then there's the geography, which we just walked through. A lot of readers reckon the deepening lake is the key to the whole thing. The thinking runs that as the dark water climbed higher and pressed harder on the rock, year after year, it eventually strained the stone below until something gave, and that opened the pool up to whatever lay in the flooded dark beneath the mountain. Once there's a gap like that, an old deep-dwelling thing has a road straight up into a fresh new home, right by the gate. I do rather like that as an idea, the pool as a kind of chimney, and the arms in the water as whatever came climbing up it, drawn to the surface, or just carried there the way water carries things. Nobody could really say which. And then there's the detail that I think is the creepiest of the lot, and it's one Gandalf keeps to himself. Out of the entire fellowship, the Watcher went for Frodo. Specifically Frodo, the one carrying the ring. Gandalf clocks this and says nothing at the time, but you can tell it bothers him, because it suggests the thing wasn't just lashing out at whatever was closest. It was drawn. It reached past everyone else and picked out the ring-bearer, the way so many dark things in this world are quietly pulled towards that ring. So that's the case for. Deep old thing, came up through the cracks, reached for the ring. Tidy, unsettling. I like it a lot. But, and I have to be fair here, none of it is actually confirmed. Not a word of it. Tolkien never links them. Anywhere. The connection is entirely something readers have built out of a couple of suggestive lines and a bit of joined-up geography, which is a perfectly nice thing to do. That's half the fun of this stuff, but it is fan theory, not fact, and I think it's only honest to say so, out loud. There's also a decent argument that the Watcher is something else entirely. Some people reckon it's a kind of water drake, a cold dragon of some sort, since it relied on sheer size and speed the way the old drakes did. Others go with the sea monster reading, which we'll get into properly in a bit, because there's a whole lovely tangent there about krakens. The point being, the Watcher is mysterious enough on its own 2 feet that you don't strictly need to file it under nameless things. It can just be its own unexplained horror, and Tolkien has no shortage of those. Where do I land? Honestly, most days I like to believe they're connected, because it makes the world feel both more joined up and more frightening at the same time. The idea that the thing at the gate was a little sample, a single arm if you like, of the much larger and much older population sat far below. A taste of the deep, come up to say hello, and then dragged back down out of sight. But I hold it loosely. That's the right way to hold any of this, I think. Loosely and with a bit of a grin, because the not knowing is the good bit. Speaking of the not knowing, there is a written record deep inside Moria of an earlier run-in with the Watcher, and it is one of the bleaker things in the whole book. So let's go and read a Dead Man's Notebook. There's a moment in Moria that I think about a lot, and it's not a monster or a fight, it's a book. Deep inside the mines, in a chamber, where they've just found a tomb, the Fellowship comes across a big, battered volume. Burned, stabbed, water-stained, barely holding together. It's a record kept by the dwarves who came here before them, and Gandalf sits down and reads it out loud as best he can. And through it, you get the story of what happened to the last lot who tried to make Moria theirs again. Because you have to remember, the dwarves had abandoned Moria long before. It had become a byword for darkness and death. But a dwarf named Balin, who some of you might remember as one of the cheerier faces from The Hobbit, decided to lead an expedition back in to reclaim the Old Kingdom. And for a while, it even worked. They got in. They settled. Balin set himself up as Lord of Moria again. And then slowly, it all went wrong. The book is written by different hands over time, and you can feel the mood of it curdle as you go. It starts out organised, hopeful even, and it ends in a scrawl. The orcs come. That's the main thing. The orcs come, and the dwarves get pushed back and back into the deep halls. But it's one particular line near the end that always stops me cold. The writing, by then barely legible, mentions that the pool outside is right up against the west gate now. And then it says, plainly, that the Watcher in the water took Oin. Oin, another name some of you will know from The Hobbit, one of Thorin's company. He survived the whole business with the dragon and the mountain and the great battle, lived a good long while afterward, and then came down here to Moria with Balin and died at the gate, taken by the thing in the lake while trying to get out. Because that's the horror of it, quietly. The dwarves realised the mines were a death trap and tried to escape the way they came in, out through the west gate, and they couldn't. The Watcher was there. The pool had risen right up to the wall, and the thing in it took one of them and blocked the way, and that route out was simply gone. They were trapped between the orcs at their backs and the Watcher at the door. The book's final entries are famous, and I'm not going to read the lot of it out, but the gist is pure dread, with no way out. They cannot get out. The drums are sounding in the deep, that low booming coming up through the rock as the orcs advance, and the very last line is basically the writer saying, "They are coming." And then nothing. The hand stops. Because whoever was writing it died right about then. Gandalf closes the book, and almost on cue, the drums start up in the real dark around them, and the Fellowship's own version of the very same nightmare begins. I find that whole sequence genuinely masterful, and also just profoundly sad. It's not sad in a loud way, it's sad in a quiet, historical way, like reading the last diary entry of an expedition that never came home. And it does something clever for our purposes tonight too, because it tells us the Watcher wasn't a one-off. It didn't just wake up for the Fellowship's convenience, it had been there for years at the gate, quietly killing anyone who came near. Oin first, others we'll never even hear about, and it would have gone right on doing it, indifferent if nobody ever came back. That's the thing about all these deep old creatures, I reckon. They're not villains exactly. A villain wants something from you. These things barely notice you're there. You're just something that wandered a bit too close to the water. Anyway, I think we've earned a lighter tangent after that one. So let's talk about sea monsters and squid, and where a mind like Tolkien's might have fished this whole image up from in the first place. Let's step out of Middle-earth entirely for a bit, because I think it's genuinely interesting to ask where a creature like the Watcher actually comes from. Not in the story, in Tolkien's head. What old stories was he swimming around in when he reached for a many-armed thing in a black pool? The obvious word everyone reaches for is kraken, and you can see why. Big, tentacled, lurks in dark water, drags things under. That's the kraken, more or less, straight out of Scandinavian sailors' tales. There's a writer called David Day who put together a sort of unofficial bestiary of Middle-earth years ago, and he leans right into this, describing the Watcher as a great kraken, an ancient thing bred back in the deeps of time. It's a fun read, that stuff, and it certainly matches the vibe. Here's the snag though, and it's a good one. Tolkien himself never called it a kraken, not once, and there's actually a solid reason to think the kraken reading doesn't quite fit, which is that in Tolkien's world, the servants of the great dark power tended to loathe and shun water. They'd only go near the sea in real desperation. So a proper sea monster, bred for the deep ocean by the first Dark Lord, is a slightly awkward fit for something that seems perfectly happy living in a stagnant mountain pool. The details don't line up as neatly as you'd want. So I'd file kraken under fun but unproven personally. What I find more interesting is the older, deeper literary roots, because this is a very old shape of story. A hero arrives at a threshold, some doorway into a new and dangerous place, and there's a monster there to stop them getting in. That's ancient. That's everywhere. The one scholars love to bring up is from Greek myth. Odysseus, on his long way home, has to sail through a narrow strait with a horror on each side. On one side, Scylla, a many-headed thing with long necks that reaches out and snatches sailors off the deck. On the other, Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallows whole ships. You have to pass between them, and you're going to lose something either way. And the Watcher, sitting in its narrow strip of water in front of a doorway, snatching at the Fellowship as they try to squeeze past, is a very Scylla sort of creature. Long arms out of the water, picking people off at the threshold. There's a name for this idea, actually. that a chap called Joseph Campbell made, famous when he was writing about the shapes that all myths seem to share. He called it the Threshold Guardian, the monster whose entire job in the story is to sit at the border between the safe world and the dangerous one, and make you prove you really mean to cross. Not to win necessarily, just to make the crossing cost something, to make it real. And that fits the Watcher perfectly when you think about it. Because what does the Watcher actually accomplish? It doesn't kill anyone in the Fellowship. What it does is slam the doors shut behind them and seal them in. It doesn't stop them entering Moria. It stops them leaving. It commits them. The moment those arms drag the doors closed, there is no more turning back, no more nipping out the way they came. The only way now is forward, through the dark, all the way to the far side. The Guardian's job is done. They're in. There's a lovely bit of analysis I came across too, pointing out that this is a very Norse way to build an obstacle. In the old northern stories, you don't just get one barrier, you get a pile of them stacked up. Grim water, then a monster in the water, then a set of doors that won't open without a riddle. Layer on layer on layer, all guarding the same threshold. And that's exactly what Moria's West Gate is. The dead lake, the thing in it, and the puzzle-locked doors all in a row. So the Watcher is doing double duty, really. On the surface, it's a great creepy set piece, arms out of the black. But underneath, it's this very old, very deliberate piece of story machinery. The Guardian at the gate, as ancient as the tales Tolkien spent his whole life loving. I think that's rather brilliant. He takes a shape thousands of years old and drops it into a mountain pool and makes it feel brand new and horrible all over again. Right, we've been circling the surface long enough, poking at the thing at the gate. It's time to actually go down. Because there's one character who genuinely made the trip into the true deep places, and it wasn't by choice. Let's follow him over the edge. So let's follow a falling body. You'll know the moment, even if you only know the films. The bridge in Moria, Gandalf and the great fiery thing, the Balrog, facing off over a narrow span of stone above a drop that seems to go down forever. Gandalf breaks the bridge. The Balrog falls, and then right at the last second, its whip lashes up and catches him round the knees, and he goes over too. Fly, you fools, and down he goes into the dark after it. Now in the film, that's basically the end of it for a good while, but Gandalf later tells the story of what actually happened down there, and it is so much stranger and longer and deeper than you'd ever guess from the bridge scene. And it's our proper way into the deep places, so let's take it slowly. They fall. For a long time, apparently. Gandalf says they went down and down, and he was burning against the Balrog's fire the whole way, the two of them locked together, dropping through the dark, and at the very bottom of it all, they hit water. A great cold underground lake, far below the mountain, in a place no one has ever seen. And that water is the first surprise, because it's cold, not just chilly. Gandalf describes it as being as cold as the tide of death, which is a phrase that has always stuck with me. Cold enough that it nearly stopped his heart. And crucially, it quenched the Balrog's fire. This creature made of flame and shadow hits the water, and the flame goes out, and it becomes something else. Gandalf describes it turning into a thing of slime, a cold, slippery, strangling thing, stronger than a snake, wrestling him down there in the black water at the bottom of the world. Just sit with that image for a second, because it's one of my favourites in all of Tolkien, and hardly anyone talks about it. The great fire demon, the thing everyone in Moria is terrified of, the thing that emptied an entire dwarf kingdom. And down here, in the deep water, it isn't a creature of fire anymore. It's cold and wet and slick. The deep changes it. Even the Balrog has to become something more like the deep in order to survive down there. And then the chase begins. The Balrog breaks away from him and flees, not up towards Moria, but off, sideways, into a whole network of tunnels. And Gandalf follows. And here is the line that connects this entire section to everything we've been talking about tonight. Gandalf says very specifically that these tunnels were not made by the dwarves, not by Durin's folk. They were something else, older, cut by something that was down there long before any dwarf ever swung a pick. So this is the moment. This is where it happens. When Gandalf later mentions the nameless things gnawing the roots of the world, this is where he believes they dwell. Down here in these tunnels that no dwarven hand ever dug, chasing a fire demon that has turned to cold slime through the true foundations of the world. The thing that gets me is that the Balrog knew these tunnels. It had lurked down in the deeps of Moria for long ages, sleeping, and in all that time it had haunted the dark labyrinths down there. It knew its way through the tunnels that nobody made. So when Gandalf follows it, he isn't just chasing an enemy. He's being led, unwillingly, through the one part of the world he was never meant to see, by the only guide who knows the way. His enemy becomes his only hope of finding a way back out. There's something almost unbearably strange about that, when you slow down and picture it. Two immortal beings, one of fire gone cold, one of light gone grey, running together through the dark under everything, past things older than either of them. We'll go deeper into what those tunnels actually are, and where that chase ends up, because it ends somewhere spectacular. But I wanted to stop here for a moment, at the bottom of the world, in the cold water, with the fire gone out, because I think it's the single eeriest place in the whole story, and almost nobody ever visits it. Here's an idea I want you to sit with, because it reframes the whole of Moria for me, and it's the sort of thought that's quite nice to turn over slowly, with your eyes shut. We think of Moria as deep, and it is. It's the greatest delving the dwarves ever managed. Halls under halls, level below level, going down through the mountains into the dark. When the dwarves dug too greedily and too deep, as the saying goes, Moria is what they were digging. It's the very picture of going too far down. But here's the thing, Moria is the top. That's the bit that gets me. All of that vast dwarven city, all those endless stairs and bottomless shafts that terrify everyone who reads about them, that's just the upper story. Because when Gandalf chases the Balrog through those tunnels that no dwarf ever cut, he's telling us there's a whole other world underneath the one the dwarves thought was the bottom. There are the foundations of stone, the deep places, and they were there long before Durin's folk ever arrived, and they go down further than anyone dug. The dwarves built the most famous underground kingdom in the whole world, and they built it on the roof of something older and stranger, and they never even knew. I love that, honestly. It's such a humbling little idea. You dig for centuries, you carve out the mightiest halls in history, you convince yourself you've reached the bottom of the world, and you're nowhere near it. You're barely scratching the ceiling of the real deep, and it's down in that real deep that the chase ends up. Because the Balrog, remember, knew these tunnels. All that long sleep under the mountain had given it time to learn the dark. So it leads Gandalf, without meaning to, on this long, strange journey through the roots of the world, until eventually they come to something the dwarves did build, but had all but forgotten. The Endless Stair. The Endless Stair is exactly what it sounds like. A spiral staircase, thousands and thousands of steps, cut by the dwarves in the deep past, winding all the way up from the very foundations of the mountain, right to its peak. By the end of the Third Age, hardly anyone believed it was even real anymore. Most dwarves thought it was a legend, or that it had been destroyed. And yet here it is, still standing, and up it they go. The Balrog fleeing, Gandalf right behind, climbing out of the deep dark, step after step after step, up through the whole height of the mountain. And where does it come out? At the very top, on the peak of one of the great mountains above Moria, the one the dwarves called Sirac-Sigil, the Silvertine, a high thin summit above the clouds. There's a little tower up there, Durin's Tower, carved out of the living rock, so old and remote it was itself half forgotten. And that's where the chase finally stops. On a narrow point of stone, above the whole world in the thin, cold air. They fought up there for 3 days. Above the mist with the sun blazing down and cloud covering everything below, so that if anyone had been watching from the ground, they'd have just seen little flashes of light around the peak and heard what they'd have taken for thunder. 2 ancient beings going at it on a mountaintop nobody could reach, while the world went about its business, far below, none the wiser. And that's how it ends. Gandalf wins in the end. The Balrog falls from the peak and breaks the mountainside as it comes down. And Gandalf Spent dies too, right up there in the cold, before he's sent back to finish the job as the White Wizard. But I always come back to the shape of that whole journey. It starts on a bridge, falls into cold water at the bottom of the world, passes through tunnels older than the dwarves and older than names, and comes out at the very top of a mountain above the clouds. From the deepest deep to the highest high in one unbroken chase. And the only part of it Gandalf refuses to talk about is the middle, the deep, the nameless part, which is exactly where we're going next. Because that refusal is worth stopping on. I want to talk about the silence, the bit where Gandalf just won't tell us. Because when he describes his fall and the chase to the others, he gives them the fight, and the water, and the stare, and the peak. He gives them a lot, really. But when it comes to the deep tunnels, the nameless part, he stops himself. He says something to the effect of, "I walked there, but I will bring back no report of it, because I don't want to darken the daylight for you." And then he simply moves on to the next bit. And I think that's one of the most quietly powerful choices in the entire work, and I want to sit with why. Start with who's saying it. This is Gandalf. This is a being who, underneath the old man's hat and the fireworks, is one of the immortal spirits, one of the same order of creatures as Sauron and the Balrog. He spent an age of the world in the Undying Lands, in the company of the great powers, learning at their feet. He has seen more of the world, and more of what's in it, than almost anyone alive. This is not a man who scares easily, and it's certainly not a man who lacks the words for things. Naming things is practically his job, and this is the one thing he will not name and will not describe. That does something to you as a reader that a full description never could. If Tolkien had written 3 paragraphs telling us exactly what the nameless things looked like, how many legs, what colour, how they moved, they'd be monsters. Impressive monsters, maybe, but monsters, and monsters can be pictured, and anything you can picture, you can eventually get the measure of. But by having Gandalf turn his face away from it, Tolkien keeps the thing exactly where it does the most work. In the dark, just past the edge of what you can imagine. Whatever you conjure up, the story quietly tells you, no, it was worse than that. And even the wisest person you know won't say it out loud. There's an old idea in horror, and honestly in storytelling generally, that the thing you don't see is always worse than the thing you do. The shape under the sheet, the sound in the next room, the moment the music stops. And Tolkien, who I don't think ever thought of himself as writing horror at all, absolutely understood this. He does it here better than almost anyone. He builds the most enormous sense of dread out of one character declining to finish a sentence. And it ties right back to the word itself, nameless. We call them the nameless things, and it's easy to hear that as just a spooky label, but I think it's more exact than that. I don't think they're nameless because nobody got round to naming them. I think they might be nameless because they can't be named, because they sit outside the whole system of things that have names. They were there before the naming started, if you like, before the categories were drawn up. And you can't file a thing that predates the filing cabinet. Gandalf's refusal, then, isn't squeamishness. I read it as respect, almost. A recognition that some things don't belong up here in the daylight, in conversation, in the tidy world of names and explanations. That the kindest thing he can do for his friends, and for us, is to close his mouth and let the deep keep its secret. And I'm glad he did, I really am. I've read a lot of attempts by other people over the years to say what the nameless things must have been, and we're going to have a lovely time doing exactly that ourselves in a minute. But some part of me always hopes we never actually land on an answer, because the day someone tells me definitively what was down in those tunnels is the day they stop being frightening. And I'd rather keep them the way Gandalf left them, unspoken, down in the dark, older than the light he wouldn't let them touch. Right, having said all that about not explaining them, let's go and explain them. Or at least have a proper go, because to understand how anything could be older than Sauron, we have to go all the way back to the very beginning of everything. And the beginning of everything, in Tolkien's world, is a song. So here we are at the beginning of all things, which is exactly the right place to be at this hour, I think, when the day's gone quiet. In Tolkien's world, the universe doesn't start with a bang or a word or a light. It starts with music. Before there was anything, there was the One, the Maker, and there were the spirits he made first, these great and powerful beings. And he taught them to sing. He gave them themes, and they made music out of them, each adding their own part, all of it weaving together into this vast harmony, bigger and more beautiful than anything that had ever been. And out of that music the whole world was made. Everything you know, from the stories, the mountains and the seas and the light and the living things, all of it was sung first, before it was ever real. The world is quite literally a song made solid. It's a gorgeous idea, and it's very Tolkien, and I could happily talk about it all night. But there's one detail in it that matters enormously for us tonight, and it's the discord. Because not all of the music was in harmony. One of those first great spirits, the mightiest of them, the one who would eventually become the first Dark Lord, didn't want to sing the theme he'd been given. He wanted to sing his own. So he started weaving in his own ideas, loud and proud and out of tune with everyone else. And it caused this great clash in the music, this dissonance, two kinds of song grinding against each other. And here's the bit I find genuinely fascinating. Tolkien, in his later writings, worked through what that clash actually produced. And his answer was that out of the discord, out of the sheer grinding dissonance between the harmony and the rebellion, things came into being that nobody had planned. Not the Maker's design, and not the Dark Lord's design either. Offcuts, if you like. Evil things that came from the friction itself, that descended from neither song directly, but from the horrible noise where the two songs fought. Just think about that for a second. Things that nobody made on purpose. Things that fell out of the gap between two intentions. Not created, not summoned, just produced, like a sort of residue of the discord, and then set loose into the world when the world became real. And that, for my money, is the single best answer to the puzzle we started with. Remember the head scratcher. How can anything be older than Sauron, when Sauron is older than the world itself? Well, here's how. If the nameless things came out of the discord in the music, then they existed back in that first song, in the timeless part before the world was even made solid. And Sauron wasn't the source of the discord. He came to it. He joined the rebellion after it had already begun, a servant, not the author. So there could easily be things that came out of that clash before he ever added his own small voice to it. Things older than him, in the only sense that counts. There from an earlier moment in the song. It also explains why nobody can name them, which I love. If they didn't descend from any deliberate act of creation, if they just fell out of the friction, then they were never given a place in the scheme. They're not one of the known kinds of being. They don't sit anywhere on the family tree, because they didn't come down the family tree at all. They came in sideways, through a crack in the music. No wonder even Gandalf hasn't got a word for them. There isn't one. There was never meant to be. Now, I want to be fair and say this is a theory, pieced together from Tolkien's notes, rather than stated flat out in the main story. He never wrote, on the page, "The nameless things came from the Discord, here endeth the lesson." But it fits so neatly, and it's so much richer and stranger than any tidy monster origin, that I've more or less adopted it as my own headcanon. The deep old things as the leftover noise of a botched harmony, the static between two songs, given teeth and sent down to gnaw at the roots of a world it was never quite part of. And once you've got that idea in your head, you start seeing it in other places in the lore too, because there is at least one other creature who seems to have come from that same sideways, unaccountable place, and she is one of the most frightening things Tolkien ever wrote. So let's go and meet the spider. Before we get to the spider though, I want to take a slight detour because there's a second theory about where the nameless things came from, and it's a darker and more hands-on one, and it deserves its moment too. The idea goes like this: what if the nameless things weren't an accident of the music at all? What if somebody made them, and that somebody is the first Dark Lord, back before he was ever beaten, in the deep old days when he ruled the north of the world from a couple of truly horrible fortresses? The first of these was a place called Utumno, and it's one of the oldest and least understood locations in the entire legendarium. This was the Dark Lord's first great stronghold, dug down deep into the earth in the far north, back in the very early days of the world, before the stars were even properly kindled, before the elves had woken, before almost anything we'd recognise. It was a place of pits and dungeons going down and down into the cold, and it was there, in the long dark before the light, that he did his breeding. Because that's what he did. He couldn't truly create, not in the way the Maker could, but he could take things and twist them, and he bred all manner of monsters down in those pits. Nameless horrors, the old texts say, for which there were no words in the time of darkness before the stars. No words. There's that idea again. Things bred so early, so deep, in a time so far back that language never caught up with them. Now Utumno was eventually thrown down. The great powers came and broke it in a war so violent it reshaped the whole north of the world, and they dragged the Dark Lord away in chains for a good long while. But here's the catch, and it's the catch that makes this theory work. When they broke Utumno, they didn't get everything. The place was so vast, its pits so deep and so tangled, that plenty of what he'd bred down there simply hid and slipped away, and was never accounted for. The powers themselves, the story admits, didn't find it all. Some of it crept off into the dark corners of the world, and was lost to memory. And later, he built a second fortress, Ambiment, and that one finally fell at the end of the First Age. Broken, yes. Emptied, no. Things escaped. Things hid. Things went deep and stayed there. So you can see how the second theory assembles itself. The nameless things gnawing at the roots of the world are the leftovers, the escaped experiments, the horrors bred in the pits of Utumno and Ambiment in the time before the stars, that slipped the net when the fortresses came down, and burrowed down into the deep places, and have simply been down there ever since, forgotten by everyone, older than the memory of anyone still walking about up top. Which theory do I prefer? Honestly, I like both, and I don't think they even fully rule each other out. Maybe some of the deep things fell out of the discord in the music, and some were bred in the pits, and by now, thousands of years on, nobody could possibly tell which is which anyway. That messiness feels right to me. The deep places as a sort of junk drawer of the world's oldest mistakes, both the accidents and the experiments, all jumbled together in the dark, gnawing away, keeping their own counsel. Either way, it tells you something lovely and terrible about this world, that its foundations aren't clean, that underneath all the songs and the kingdoms and the noble deeds, there's a layer of very old, very patient things that predate the whole business and don't care about any of it. And that, I think, is a large part of why Middle-earth feels as deep as it does. The flaw isn't the flaw, there's always something underneath, right? The spider. Let's finally go and meet her, because she is the clearest example of an old, unaccountable, sideways sort of horror that Tolkien ever put on the page, and she is genuinely one of my favourite things in all of it. So let me tell you about a spider so terrible that even the Dark Lord was afraid of her. And I mean the proper Dark Lord, the first one. The one Sauron only worked for. She frightened him. Once you know her story, you understand why. Her name is Ungoliant, and she is, for my money, the best single example in all of Tolkien of a creature that came from somewhere outside the tidy scheme of things. Because nobody, not the wise, not the great powers, not even the storytellers, can tell you for certain where she came from. The best anyone can say is that she came out of the darkness. There's this phrase that gets used about her, that she descended from the darkness that lies about the world. Not from within it, from around it, from the black outside, before and beyond everything, back when the first Dark Lord first looked down. In envy on the beautiful realm the powers had built. Some say she was one of the great spirits herself once, corrupted early and fallen far, but she was never counted among them, never on any list, and the sense you get, reading between the lines, is that she might be something genuinely from outside, from the void that isn't part of the song at all, which puts her in exactly the same strange, unaccountable category as our nameless things, old, sideways, unplaceable. She took the shape of a monstrous spider, and she settled in a cold, lightless ravine in the far south of the Blessed Realm, in a region so dark and forgotten that even the powers didn't patrol it. And there she did the strangest, most unsettling thing. She ate light. She sucked in whatever light she could find and spun it out again as darkness. Not shadow, not mere absence, but an active, woven darkness, a thing she made, called the unlight. A dark that light could not pierce, that the eye slid off, in which things seemed simply to stop being. She fed on brightness and turned it into a void, and the more she did it, the hungrier she got, until no light could reach her hollow at all, and she was starving in the dark of her own making. And then the first Dark Lord came looking for her, because he had a plan, and he needed her hunger. At the heart of the Blessed Realm stood the two great trees, one silver, one gold, and they were the source of all the light in the world in those days, before the sun and moon were ever made, and the Dark Lord wanted them dead. So he struck a bargain with the spider. He would strike the trees and she would drink them dry. And she did. She went to the mound where they grew and she drained them, drank down all that ancient light, the silver and the gold both, and where the light had been, she left withered husks, and still she was hungry. So she drank the wells where the light was kept in reserve as well, drained those too, and swelled, belching out black vapours, growing to a size so vast and so hideous that the Dark Lord himself, her own ally, looked at what he'd unleashed and was afraid. That's the detail that always stops me. He wanted a weapon, and he got one, and the weapon grew bigger than him. There's an old lesson in there about the things we let out of the dark to do our dirty work, and how they don't stay small, and how they don't stay ours, and she didn't stay his. They fled the Blessed Realm together under her cloak of unlight, and when they got to the far side, she turned on him. She wanted more. She wanted the jewels he was carrying, and when he refused to hand over the greatest of them, she wrapped him in her webs and started to squeeze, and this most powerful being in the whole world let out a cry of such pure terror that it was heard for miles. And what saved him, in the end, was his oldest servants, the fire demons, the same kind of creature as the Balrog we followed into the deep earlier. They came rushing to the sound of his scream and drove her off with their whips of flame, and she fled south and vanished into a valley of horror that took its name from her dread. And her ending, such as we know it, is the most fitting and most awful thing of all. She kept eating. She mated with lesser things and devoured them, and spread her hungry brood, and grew and hungered, And in the very end, the stories say, when there was nothing left to eat, she ate herself. The hunger that ate the light of the world finally turned inward and consumed the only thing it had left, which is either a grim little morality tale or genuinely one of the bleakest images in all of fantasy, depending on how tired you are. Probably both. She is, I think, the closest thing the books give us to a nameless thing we actually get to watch in full. Old beyond accounting, from outside the scheme, driven by a hunger that isn't even really about power or malice, just an endless, empty need to consume and negate. That's a very different flavour of frightening from Sauron, who at least wants things you can understand. She just wants to eat the light, all of it, until there's none left, including her own. And here's the part that ties her back to the world we actually walk through in the main story. She had children. Now, most people who've only seen the films know exactly one giant spider, and it isn't Ungoliant, it's Shelob. The horror in the tunnel above Mordor, the one that gets Frodo near the end, the one Sam has to face, with a little glass vial of light, and a great deal more courage than he thinks he has. And here's the lovely, horrible connection. Shelob is Ungoliant's daughter, or descendant at least, the last of her line that we know of. That great primordial light eater from the dawn of the world has a direct thread running all the way down through the ages to a spider in a cave that a hobbit gardener stabs with an elf blade. The oldest darkness and the smallest, homeliest hero, meeting in one tunnel. I think that's a stunning bit of design, honestly. There are little signs of the connection scattered about, if you know to look. The pass where Shelob lurks is called Cirith Ungol, and that name actually means the cleft of the spider. The word for spider in it, Ungol, is the same root that sits inside Ungoliant's own name. So even the map is quietly telling you whose child lives there, for anyone paying attention. And back in the great dark forest of Mirkwood, the big spiders that Bilbo tangles with in The Hobbit, they're described as being of the same brood, spawn of that same ancient mother, thinned out and lessened, but unmistakably, from the same stock. Because that's what happened to the line over the long ages. It faded, it got smaller. Ungoliant was a near-cosmic terror who frightened the Dark Lord and drank the light of the world. Her descendants, thousands of years later, are big and dangerous and horrible, but they're animals more or less. Shelob is the largest and oldest of them left, and even she is a shadow of what her ancestor was. She doesn't want to eat the light of the world. She just wants to eat, full stop, and she's very good at it, and she's lived in her tunnel for an age growing fat on anyone unlucky enough to pass. But the grandeur is gone. What's left is the hunger, the same endless hunger passed down the generations, gone feral. There's a detail I really like about Shelob, which is that she and Sauron aren't allies. You might assume she works for him, sitting there guarding the back door to his land. But she doesn't. Tolkien was quite clear about this in his letters. She serves nobody. She has no side. She'll eat Sauron's orcs just as happily as anyone else's people. And the only thing she and the Dark Lord actually share is a general hatred of everything living. He tolerates her because she keeps his back door well guarded in her own selfish way, but she is entirely her own creature. Which is, once again, that same old theme running right through everything we've talked about tonight. The oldest and strangest things in this world don't line up neatly on one side or the other. They have their own purposes. They were here first and they answer to nobody. So when Sam stands in that tunnel with his little light held up against her, he's actually standing against something far, far older than the war he thinks he's fighting. Older than Sauron, in a sense, a last dim echo of that first darkness that tried to swallow the light before the sun and moon were even made. He doesn't know that. He just knows there's a monster and his friend is in danger. But the thread is there, running all the way back, and I think it makes that little scene quietly enormous once you can see it. Which brings me in a roundabout way to the strangest turn in all of this, because so far, everything old and unaccountable we've looked at has been frightening. The nameless things, the Watcher, the Spider. Dark, all of it. But there's one being in Tolkien's world who is every bit as old and every bit as unexplainable. And he's not frightening in the slightest. In fact, he's about the most cheerful person in the whole story. And I think he might be the key to understanding all the rest of them. So let's go and find Tom Bombadil. Now, Tom is a divisive fellow. Plenty of readers find him a bit much. All the singing and the nonsense rhymes and the bright yellow boots. And I understand that, I do. He gets cut from every major live-action adaptation for a reason. But I've always had a soft spot for him. And the more you learn about the deep lore, the more I think he's secretly one of the most important and most fascinating things in the entire world Tolkien built. Because Tom, for all his silliness, is a genuine mystery on the exact same level as the nameless things. He's just the mystery pointed the other way. Here's the setup, if you don't know it. Early in the journey, before all the big set pieces, the hobbits get into trouble in an old forest and get rescued by this odd, jolly, ancient man who lives there with his wife. He sings constantly. He seems completely unbothered by anything. And there are two moments involving him that ought to stop any careful reader dead. The first is what he says about his own age. When they ask him who he is, he tells them, more or less, that he is the eldest, that he was here first. He remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He was here before the river, before the trees, before the world was even properly furnished. He was here, he says, before the Dark Lord came in from outside, before the Dark Lord, which puts Tom in that same near impossible bracket we keep bumping into, older than the great evil, present at the very beginning. Nobody knows what he is. And the second moment is the ring. At one point, almost as a joke, the hobbits hand Tom the ring. The ring. The single most dangerous and corrupting object in the world. The thing that bends everyone who touches it. That even the wise are terrified to handle. And Tom takes it and laughs and spins it on his finger and looks through the hole in the middle at them and hands it straight back. And when he puts it on, he doesn't vanish. Nothing happens. The ring has no power over him at all, none. It doesn't even make him flicker. That is astonishing. When you think about what the ring does to, literally, everyone else. And nobody in the story can explain it. The wise talk about him at the Great Council, and the best they can manage is that the ring simply has no hold on him, because he is, in some fundamental way, outside its whole system. Its power is about control and possession, and Tom possesses nothing and wants nothing. So there's nothing for it to grab hold of. He's not more powerful than the ring exactly. He's just not playing the same game. He's other, and that word, other, is the whole point. And it's why I wanted to end up here. Because Tolkien himself, when people wrote to him asking what on earth Tom was supposed to be, more or less refused to answer. He said in so many words that some things ought to remain a mystery in any world, that even in an invented mythology there have to be a few enigmas, and Tom was one of them. Quite deliberately. He didn't want to explain him. He wanted him to stay unexplained. Which is exactly, precisely what he does with the nameless things. Do you see it? They're the same move. Tom Bombadil and the nameless things sit at the two far ends of the world. One out in the bright green forest, one down in the deepest dark, and they are made of the same stuff. Tom older than the Dark Lord. The nameless things simply ancient dwellers of the deep. Both impossible to place on the family tree of creation. Both things Tolkien could easily have explained and chose, on purpose, to leave as pure mystery. The nameless things are the other turned frightening. Tom is the other turned kind. One is the deep dark of the world grown teeth. The other is the deep old life of the world grown a cheerful face and a silly hat. And I find that genuinely beautiful, that the world has both. That the same unaccountable ancientness, that produced things too horrible to name, down in the roots, also produced this warm, harmless, singing old soul up in the woods who could hold the doom of the world on his fingertip and just laugh. Same mystery, opposite temperature. And Tolkien, wonderful old man that he was, left them both exactly as they were, unexplained, at either end of his world, holding it up between them. Right, let's stay up here in the light for a moment longer, because Tom isn't the only strange thing in the world that doesn't fit the neat categories. There are a few others, and they're worth a gentle wander. Once you start noticing the odd ones, the ones that don't slot neatly into elf or dwarf or man or orc, you start seeing them all over the place. And it's one of my favourite things about Middle-earth, honestly. The edges of it aren't tidy. There are all these leftover in-between things, and Tolkien mostly just lets them be strange, without ever fully explaining them. Take Old Man Willow. In that same old forest where the hobbits meet Tom, there's a tree. And it's not just a spooky tree for atmosphere. It's alive, properly alive, with a will and a temper and a deep, patient malice. It nearly eats two of the hobbits, lulls them to sleep against its trunk, and starts to swallow them into itself. And the forest around it is described as being full of that same slow, resentful awareness. The trees remember. They remember when the whole world was forest, and they remember it being cut back, and they haven't forgiven anyone for it. That's not a monster in the usual sense. That's a place and a very old living thing, holding a grudge across the long ages. Nobody made Old Man Willow evil. He's just old and the world got smaller around him, and he's bitter about it, the way you might be. Then there's the mountain. On the way to Moria in the first place, before they ever reach that dreadful lake, the Fellowship tries to cross a high pass over a mountain called Caradhras, the Red Horn, and the mountain won't let them. It throws snow at them out of a clear sky, drops rocks, howls wind down at them, until they're forced to turn back. And there's this real sense, never quite stated but strongly felt, that the mountain is doing it on purpose, that Caradhras itself is cruel, that it simply hates the little walking things trying to cross its shoulder and is actively trying to kill them. The characters even argue about it afterward. Was that Sauron? Was that the enemy? And the answer they land on is no, probably not. Caradhras was just being Caradhras. Some of the old mountains were unfriendly all on their own, long before any Dark Lord, and they needed no one's permission to hate you. I love that so much. The idea that the land itself has moods and old grievances and a will of its own, that a mountain can just be a bad sort, independently, for its own ancient reasons. And there's a line that ties all of these together, spoken by Aragorn, of all people, that I think is one of the quietly key lines in the whole work. He says, at one point, that there are many strange and unfriendly things abroad in the world, things that have little love for anyone who walks about on two legs, and yet are no friends of Sauron either, but follow purposes of their own. Some of them, Gandalf notes, have been in the world far longer than the Dark Lord. That's the whole thing, right there, in one sentence. The world is full of things with their own purposes. Not good, not evil, not on anyone's side, just old and strange, and here first. Old Man Willow, Caradhras, the Watcher, the nameless things down in the deep, Tom Bombadil on the bright side of it. They're all part of the same truth about this world, which is that it is so much bigger and older and stranger than the story happening in the foreground. The War of the Ring is enormous to the people fighting it, but there's a whole population of ancient things all around them, in the trees and the mountains and the deep water and the roots of the earth, who never look up from their own long, slow business for even a moment. I think that's actually why Middle-earth feels the way it feels, why it feels lived in and real and impossibly deep, in a way most invented worlds never quite manage. It's because it's full of things that don't serve the plot. The plot happens to pass through their world and they barely notice, and that, weirdly, is what makes the world feel true. Most invented worlds are built entirely around their hero, with everything in them pointing back at the main character, like arrows. This one was clearly built to be a world first, and then a story was allowed to happen in one small corner of it, while all the old strangeness got on with its own affairs everywhere else, paying the heroes no mind at all. Which is a strangely comforting thought to me, actually, at this hour. But we'll get to the comfort in a little while. First, though, I want to go back down one more time and talk about why anyone ever went into the deep in the first place, and what they woke when they did. Before we leave the deep places behind and come back up towards the surface, I want to talk about why the dwarves went down so far in the first place. Because it wasn't stupidity, and it wasn't quite bravery either. It was, in the end, a shiny metal. Moria, in its glory days, was the richest kingdom the dwarves ever had, and the reason was a substance you can't find anywhere else in the whole world. They called it mithril, true silver in the common tongue, though the dwarves had their own name for it, and mostly kept that to themselves. And it was extraordinary stuff, light as a feather, hard as dragon scale, and it never tarnished, never dulled, kept its cold silver shine forever. You could beat it thin enough to make a shirt of mail out of it that weighed almost nothing, and yet it would turn aside a spear thrust like a stone wall. It was worth more than gold, far more. There's a moment later in the story where it's mentioned that a single, small coat of the stuff was worth more than the entire Shire and everything in it, which is the kind of detail that really lands just how precious it was. And here's the thing about mithril. Moria was the only place in the world it was ever found. Nowhere else. Just here, in the deep veins under these particular mountains. So the dwarves had a monopoly on the most valuable material in existence, and it made them wealthy beyond imagining. And it made this the greatest dwarf kingdom that ever was. But the mithril ran in veins, and veins run deeper the more you follow them. And that's the trap, isn't it? When the thing you want most in the world is only found by digging down, you dig down. And when the vein keeps going, you keep following it, deeper and deeper, chasing that silver thread further into the dark than anyone had ever gone before. You can probably see where this is heading. There's a famous phrase, a warning really, that comes up whenever people talk about the fall of Moria, that the dwarves dug too greedily and too deep. And somewhere down there, following the mithril further than was wise, they dug into something. They broke through into a part of the deep that should have been left well alone, and they woke something that had been sleeping down there since the elder days. One of the old fire demons, the one that would come to be called Durin's Bane, because the first thing it did was kill the king, and the second thing it did was end the kingdom. And that was that. The richest, greatest dwarf realm in the world, undone. The dwarves fled, and Moria stopped being a name of splendour and became a name of dread, an empty black pit that everyone avoided for centuries. All because they followed the shiny thing one tunnel too far. I find that genuinely haunting, and not in a monstery way at all. It's such a human sort of downfall. It isn't that the dwarves were wicked. They were just doing what everyone does, chasing the valuable thing, working hard, going a bit further each time because there was always a little more just below. And they went past the point where the world would forgive it. They reached down into the old dark, the part that was there first, the part that belonged to the sleeping things, and they woke it up. There's a lesson tucked in there about depth, I think, that runs through this whole subject. The deep is not empty. It was never empty. Every time someone in these stories goes too far down, chasing gold or mithril or power or a lost kingdom, they find that the deep already has occupants, and those occupants are older and stronger and far less pleased to be disturbed than anyone bargained for. The dwarves of Moria are just the clearest example. They dug for treasure and found the thing the treasure had been sitting on top of the whole time. And the nameless things are further down still, remember, below even the level that woke the fire demon, which means, in a strange way, the dwarves actually got off lightly, as odd as that sounds to say. They only reached as far as the demon. There was worse below that they never touched. Small mercies. Right, let's talk about the sound of all this. Because before you ever see anything down in the deep, you hear it. And the hearing is somehow worse. There's a thing Tolkien does with the deep places that's easy to miss, and I think it's one of his quiet masterstrokes. He understood that down in the dark, the most frightening sense isn't sight, it's hearing. Think about it for a second. In the deep, you can't see much of anything. A torch throws a little pool of light, and then the black closes right back in around it. So your eyes are next to useless, and everything you're actually afraid of is somewhere out beyond the edge of the light, unseen, which means the deep is a world of sound. You navigate it by ear, and you dread it by ear, and the worst moments aren't when you see something. They're when you hear something, and you don't know what it is, and you can't see it, and it's getting closer. The great example, of course, is the drums. When the Fellowship is down in Moria, before anything actually attacks them, there's this sound. A deep, booming beat coming up out of the dark below them and rolling through the stone. Doom. Doom. Like a great drum being struck somewhere far down in the roots of the mountain. And nobody knows what's making it. That's the genius of it, honestly. It's not the sight of an army. It's a sound with no visible source coming from below, getting nearer. The dwarves who died here heard it too, remember. Right at the end, scrawled into that last terrible book. The same booming, echoing up out of the same dark, across the years. Whatever it is, it was here before, and it's still here, and all you ever get is the sound of it. There's a particular kind of horror in that which I think is quite special. A monster you can see is frightening, but it's also, in a way, a bit of a relief, because at least now you know what you're dealing with. A sound in the dark is worse, because your mind fills the blank, and your mind is merciless. It always imagines something bigger and closer and worse than whatever's actually there. And Tolkien leans on that constantly in the deep places, the swish and plop of something in the black water before you ever see an arm, the booming below before you ever see the orcs. The deep announces itself in sound long before it shows itself, if it ever shows itself at all. And that ties right back to the nameless things, doesn't it? Because that's exactly what they are in the end. A sound with no source, a rumour from below. Gandalf hears of them, walks among them, and comes back with nothing to show you but a shudder and a refusal. They're the ultimate version of the thing in the dark you never quite see. All echo, no body. All dread, no picture. But I want to leave you with the other side of the deep too before we move on, because it wasn't always a place of dread. Once Moria was beautiful, genuinely, breathtakingly beautiful. There's a great hall down there, and when the Fellowship passes through it and Gandalf lifts a little light, you get this glimpse of what it must once have been. Pillars carved to look like great trees, soaring up into a dark so high the roof is lost. Halls upon halls, delved and shaped and polished over centuries by the finest stoneworkers who ever lived. In its day, lit by countless lamps and full of the sound of dwarven voices and hammers, it must have been one of the true wonders of the entire world. Not a black pit at all, a city of stone under the mountains gleaming, and I think that actually makes the deep even more poignant. It wasn't always the domain of the drums and the dark. People lived there and made it lovely, and were proud of it, and were happy in it. The dread came later. The silence came later. The nameless things, though, they were there the whole time, far below all of it, before the dwarves came and after they left, entirely indifferent to the lamps being lit and then going out again. The city was a brief bright thing on top of a very old dark, and then the brightness passed the way brightness always seems to, and the old dark just carried quietly on. Which brings me to the one character who knew that deep dark better than almost anyone alive, and paid about the highest price for it. Let's talk about the saddest creature in the whole story, and the long, lonely stretch of years he spent all alone in the roots of the mountains. Here's a thought that only occurred to me fairly recently, and once it did, I couldn't unthink it. Of all the characters in the whole story, the one who spent the most time down in the deep dark places, alone, for the longest, is Gollum. We tend to think of Gollum in terms of the ring, obviously. The whole tragedy of him, poor wretched thing, is about the ring, how it found him, how it warped him, how it stretched his little life out far past its natural end. But step back from the ring for a second and just look at where he lived. Because after he got the ring and got driven out of his home, Gollum crawled down under the misty mountains, and he stayed there, in the dark, by a cold underground lake on an island of slimy rock, for about 500 years, centuries down there, alone in the dark, eating blind fish and the occasional unlucky goblin, talking only to himself, in the dark, by the black water. That's where Bilbo finds him, in The Hobbit, for the riddle game. Right down in the roots of the mountains by that still cold lake. And here's the connection that gives me a proper chill. Remember, back near the start, we talked about how The Hobbit mentions strange things living in the pools and lakes in the hearts of the mountains. Things older than the goblins, more slimy than fish, that were there before anyone, and just withdrew deeper when the goblins came digging. Well, Gollum lived by exactly that kind of pool, in exactly those depths, for a very long time indeed. And it is entirely possible the lore leaves the door wide open for it, that down there in the dark, over all those long years, Gollum met some of them. The original owners, the old things in the deep water. We don't know. Tolkien never says. But he doesn't say it didn't happen either, and the timing and the place line up perfectly, which means one of the most memorable characters in the whole story may have spent centuries as a near neighbour to the nameless things, sharing the same lightless world, and we simply never got that story. What did Gollum see down there, in all those long years by the Black Lake? What kept to the far corners, while he muttered to himself? We'll never know, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to. It reframes him a bit too, doesn't it? We think of Gollum as a creature of the surface world gone wrong, a hobbitish thing twisted by a ring, but he's also, in a real way, a creature of the deep. He went down as far as almost anyone in the story ever willingly goes, and stayed there for longer than most kingdoms last, and came back up thin and pale and strange, with big lamp-like eyes made for the dark, hating the sun. The deep changed him slowly, the way it seems to change everything that spends too long down there. It cooled his fire, so to speak, the same way the deep water cooled the Balrog. He went down a murderer and came back up something else, something adapted, something that belonged to the dark more than the light. And that's the quiet horror of the deep places, I think, running underneath all of this. It's not just that there are old things down there, it's that the deep does something to whatever spends time in it. It's patient, and it's cold, and it's dark, and it wears you down into something that fits it. The dwarves dug too deep and woke something that unmade their kingdom. The Balrog slept down there so long it lay forgotten in the deepest tunnels beneath Khazad Dûm. Gollum went down for the ring and came back barely a person. Even Gandalf came back from his fall into the abyss changed, whiter and stranger and quieter about certain things. The deep keeps its own. That's the sense I always come away with. You can visit if you're unlucky or foolish or brave enough, but it marks you, and the things that have been down there since before the world was properly finished, the truly old ones, they're not visitors, they're at home. It's we who don't belong down there, poking about with our little lights in a dark that was old before light was even invented. Right, let's come back up towards the surface, and towards the present, because it's rather nice to see how these old deep things have carried on echoing in the minds of everyone who's come to the stories since. One of the things I find genuinely lovely about the nameless things is how much life they've taken on, considering they get one sentence in the actual books. One sentence, and out of that single sentence, decades of fascination. You see it everywhere once you go looking. Go into any corner of the internet where people talk about Tolkien, and sooner or later somebody asks the question, what were the nameless things? And then off it goes, this wonderful sprawling conversation, people bringing in the discord of the music, the pits of the old fortresses, the spider, the watcher, all of it, everyone with their own favourite theory, nobody ever quite able to prove it. It's been going for as long as people have been reading the books closely, and it never resolves, and I don't think anyone actually wants it to. The question is the fun. The moment it got answered, the party would be over. The games have had their go at it too. If you've ever played through the deep levels of a Moria game, you'll know that feeling of dread the designers try to build as you go down. The sense that the dwarf halls are just the beginning, and there's something worse in the lowest dark. And the recent television show, set in the earlier ages, has started reaching for the idea as well, actually using the phrase nameless things out loud, and showing the odd creature lurking in the mud and the deep water, hinting at that same old population of unaccountable horrors. Whether you love the show or you don't, and people have opinions, I think it's rather telling that a modern production reached back for that specific bit of unexplained lore. Because the pull of it is real. There's something about a thing that's deliberately left blank that draws people in far harder than a thing fully drawn. And that's the trick of it, isn't it? That's what Tolkien understood, and what everyone since has been trying to reverse engineer. A fully described monster belongs to the author. A blank belongs to everyone. The moment Tolkien declined to say what was down there, he handed the nameless things to every reader who would ever come after, and each of us has been quietly filling in that blank in our own head ever since, with our own private worst thing. That's why they feel so personal. Your nameless things and mine are almost certainly different, and both of them are more frightening to us than anything a page of description could have been, because we each built ours out of our own dark. I think that's a genuinely rare thing for a writer to pull off. Most storytelling is about giving you a clear picture. This is the opposite. This is the deliberate withholding of the picture, trusting you to do the frightening work yourself, and trusting that you'll do it better than they could. It takes a real confidence to leave a hole in your own masterpiece, and just trust the reader to fall into it. And people have been falling into it happily for generations now. That's a kind of immortality when you think about it. Sauron gets defeated. The ring gets destroyed. The story ends the way stories do. But the nameless things never get resolved, so they never end. They're still down there in every reader's imagination, exactly as unknown as the day the book came out, gnawing away quietly at the roots of a world that millions of people carry around in their heads, still older than Sauron himself, still unnamed. There's something almost peaceful in that, to me. The idea that the most enduring thing in all of Middle-earth might not be a hero or a king or a great deed, but a mystery, a gap, a question a tired wizard declined to answer, that we've all been happily failing to answer ever since. Which brings me round, near the end here, to what I actually think all of this is really about. Because I don't think the nameless things are really about horror at all in the end. I think they're about something quieter and older than fear. So let's finish with that. I want to talk, gently, about why I think Tolkien reached for this at all. Why a kindly old professor who loved languages and trees and pipe smoke and second breakfast put something at the bottom of his world that even he wouldn't describe. There's a whole flavour of storytelling that this brushes up against. The sort of thing people call cosmic horror. You'll know the shape of it even if you don't know the name. It's the idea that the universe is vast and old and utterly indifferent to us. That there are things out in the dark or down in the deep, so ancient and so alien that the human mind can't even properly hold them, and that our little concerns don't register with them at all. The most famous name attached to that stuff is Lovecraft, writing around the same sort of time as Tolkien, actually. And the Nameless things do have a bit of that chill to them, older than Sauron, beyond understanding, the sort of thing you're not meant to look at directly. But here's where I think Tolkien does something different, and something I find much warmer, and it's why I can happily fall asleep to this instead of lying awake. In the cold, cosmic horror version of things, the indifferent dark is the whole truth. The universe is empty and uncaring. The old things in the deep are the real face of reality, and all our light and meaning is just a thin, comforting lie we tell ourselves over the top of the void. That's the bleak heart of it. The dark is real, and the light is pretend. Tolkien flips that. In his world, the dark is real, yes. The nameless things are really down there, gnawing away, older than Sauron. He doesn't pretend otherwise, and he doesn't make it safe. But the dark isn't the deepest truth of his world. Remember where we started, right back at the beginning of everything. His world is a song. It was sung into being on purpose, out of harmony, by a maker who meant it. And even the discord, even the rebellion, even the horrible grinding noise that maybe produced the nameless things in the first place, even that gets woven, in the end, into a music bigger than itself. The dark is real, but the song is realer. The light was there first, and the light gets the last word. So the nameless things, in Tolkien's hands, aren't proof that the world is empty. They're the opposite. They're the shadow that proves how deep and how full the world actually is. A world with a bottom that's frightening as a world with real weight to it. And the fact that a tired wizard can walk through the worst of it and still come back up into the daylight, and still sit with his friends, and still choose kindness by refusing to darken their day with it, that tells you everything about which force Tolkien thought was stronger. The dark is down there, but the daylight is worth protecting, and it wins. That's why I don't think he ever needed to describe them, beyond the reasons of craft we already talked about. It's not just that a blank is scarier than a picture, though it is. It's that the nameless things were never really the point. They're the deep dark edge that makes the lit centre mean something. You don't need to map the whole abyss. You just need to know it's there, so that everything up in the light feels precious by contrast. The morning tastes better for the length of the night, and all that. And so he left them nameless, on purpose, down at the very bottom, older than his dark lord, unknown even to the wise, and he closed the book on them and never opened it again. Not because he couldn't have, because he understood that some things are more powerful kept in the dark, that a world needs a few genuine mysteries in it to feel real, that the deep should stay deep. I think he was right. I've spent, an embarrassing amount of my life poking at this stuff, and I've come round entirely to his way of thinking. I don't want to know what the nameless things are. Not really. I want them exactly where he left them. Down in the roots of the world, gnawing quietly, keeping their own ancient counsel, in a dark that was old before the first light was ever sung. So, there we are. The nameless things. 3 sentences in the end. That's all they ever were on the page. A tired wizard, back from the dead, mentioning something he saw at the bottom of the world and choosing not to describe it. And out of that one sentence, all of this, the watcher in its drowned pool, the tunnels no dwarf ever dug, the spider who ate the light, the cheerful old man who could hold the world's doom on his fingertip and laugh, a whole hidden layer of the world, older than the Dark Lord, indifferent to all of it, just going quietly about its endless business in the deep. And I find at the end of all of it that the feeling I'm left with isn't fear at all. It's something much closer to comfort, oddly enough. Because think about where they are, right now, in the world of the story. Far, far below everything. Below Moria, below the Balrog's grave on the broken mountainside. Below all the battles and the kings and the great deeds that felt so enormous up there in the sunlight. below the whole War of the Ring that seemed like the most important thing that had ever happened. And none of it reached them. None of it mattered to them. They just kept on, in the dark, gnawing slowly at the roots of the world, exactly as they had before any of it began, and exactly as they would long after it was all over and forgotten. There's something that settles me about that. The reminder that the world is so much bigger and older and stranger than whatever feels so urgent today. That underneath all the noise, there are old, patient, quiet things that were here first and will be here after, minding their own business, in no hurry at all. You don't have to find it frightening. You can just let it be large and old and calm, and let yourself feel very small and very held inside something enormous. I might do a proper deep dive on the spider one of these nights, actually, or the fire demons, since we only really met the one. There's always more down there. There always is. That's the whole point of the place. But that's plenty for tonight. The deep can keep the rest of its secrets. It's rather good at that. Sleep well. Mind the dark water on your way down, and I'll see you in the